Welcome to 1189, an online Bible commentary. My name is Tyler Marston, and today we're taking a look at Exodus chapter 12. God has told Moses and Pharaoh and the Egyptians what the final plague is going to be, the death of the firstborn. However, God is going to give the Israelites some instructions to set up a specific sacrificial ordinance. It'll display their holiness, their set apartness, their distinction from the Egyptians. And it'll show that that holiness is based on obedience to God's word. That's what brings deliverance. In this story, rescue from the death of the firstborn. This ordinance that we call Passover will go on to become the defining moment of Israelite identity and still is for Jewish people today. Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year for you." The first instructions for the Israelites when it comes to Passover is to restructure their entire calendar around this event. In that way, it becomes a constant reminder of this event for them. And it symbolizes that they should be basing their entire lives off of God's covenant instructions for deliverance. Verses 3 through 10 relay the instructions for the Passover lamb and the meal. To sum it up, they have to take a year-old lamb without blemishes or defects, and they have to sacrifice it on the 14th day of the month. They have to roast it on an open fire and eat the whole thing with their family and their neighbors. They're not allowed to save any of the meat for later, and they have to spread some of the lamb's blood on the doorposts of their homes. Now you shall eat it in this manner, with your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I shall go through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. God instructs the people to eat this last meal with their shoes on, with their staff in their hand, and with their loins girded. That refers to a certain way you tie up your robe or tunic when you're about to run or fight. The point is, they're going to have to move fast, so they have to be ready. And God says He's going to strike down the firstborn of all the people in Egypt unless He sees the lamb's blood on their doorposts. So this is a sign of holy obedience, sacrifice, and complete trust in Him. If they follow His instructions, they will live and they will escape slavery. Verses 14 through 20 give instructions for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the point is the same as before. They're going to have to be ready to go. So they can't sit around waiting for their bread dough to proof. They need to take it with them unleavened. And that also is going to be memorialized into an annual feast along with the Passover. Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go and take for yourselves lambs according to your families, and slay the Passover lamb. You shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood which is in the basin, and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and to the two doorposts. And none of you shall go outside the door of his house until morning." Moses goes on and repeats all these previous instructions to the people. And they specifically use hyssop branches to apply the blood to their doorposts. Hyssop is a plant with medicinal properties that's used in many Jewish purification rituals like Leviticus 14 and Numbers 19. Probably most famously, it's what David asked to be purified with in Psalm 51 when he's repenting from his sin with Bathsheba. The symbolism of all of this makes it clear that faithfulness to God's words and instructions is what purifies them. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians. And when He sees the blood on the lintel and on the two doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to come into your houses and smite you. And so the name for Passover comes from this verse. The fact that God will pass over and not judge those people who are covered by the blood of the Lamb. If that sounds familiar, that's because a lot of this symbolism has been picked up and applied to the story of Jesus, who intentionally chose to die around the time Passover was being celebrated precisely to make this point. When we believe in Jesus' sacrifice for us, and when we are faithful to Him, we're delivered and saved from judgment and condemnation. We're purified and forgiven of our sins. And you shall observe this event as an ordinance for you and your children forever. When you enter the land which the Lord will give you, as he has promised, you shall observe this rite. And when your children say to you, 'What does this rite mean to you?' you shall say, 'It is a Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the sons of Israel in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians and spared our homes.' And the people bowed low and worshipped." God is very clear that this meal should be an annual ordinance, so that future generations will always remember what God did for them. If God rescued the Israelites from slavery, surely he will save us from our various predicaments and sufferings, provided that we have faith in his word, obey it, and live holy lives. Then the sons of Israel went and did so, just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. Here in this moment, the Israelites have faith in his word, obey it, and live holy lives. Because they have faith in God, they obey him. And because they obey him, they're delivered. Now it came about at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. Pharaoh arose in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was no home where there was not someone dead. In contrast, the Egyptians do not show faith or obedience to God, and they're judged for how they've treated the Israelite slaves. Even the mighty Pharaoh is judged. His own son dies. And this is the first plague that's really permanently affected anything in his household. While all the other plagues showed that the Yahweh God was sovereign over all the Egyptian gods and idols, this plague shows that the Yahweh God is sovereign over Pharaoh, who had exalted himself as a god to his people and in his own heart. Then he called for Moses and Aaron at night and said, "Rise up, get out from among my people, both you and the sons of Israel, and go, worship the Lord as you have said. Take both your flocks and your herds, as you have said, and go, and bless me also." Pharaoh sends a message to Moses and Aaron in the middle of the night. Just get out. Do what you said you were going to do. Worship the Lord, and bless me too. The prideful Pharaoh has been humbled. He submits to letting the people go, and even asked for God's favor on his life. The Egyptians urged the people to send them out of the land in haste, for they said, "We will all be dead." So the people took their dough before it was leavened, with their kneading bowls bound up in the clothes on their shoulders. Just as God said, the Egyptians are not only letting the Israelites leave, they're forcing them to leave, and in a hurry. That's why it was so important to eat the Passover meal with their loins girded, with their staffs in their hands, and without letting their bread be proofed. Now the sons of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, for they had requested from the Egyptians articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let them have their request. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. Of course, intentionally, none of this happened before the people had received the silver and gold they had gotten from their Egyptian neighbors. And in this way, Genesis 15, Exodus 3, and Exodus 11 all come true. This is not to say that the Israelites don't have a tough road ahead, but they're far from empty-handed because of God's sovereign providence. Now the sons of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from children. A mixed multitude also went up with them, along with flocks and herds and a very large number of livestock. They baked the dough which had been brought out of Egypt into cakes of unleavened bread, for it had not become leavened since they were driven out of Egypt, and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. Now the time that the sons of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years, and at the end of 430 years, to the very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. After 430 years and growing to 600,000 men, the Israelites escape slavery in Egypt. And they're provided for with food and monetary possessions and with livestock. And it was all because they were faithfully obedient to God's commands, and because God did not forget his covenant with his people. In verses 42 to 50, the chapter ends with more instructions about the ordinance of Passover. It's very clear that when remembering this event in the future, only circumcised Jewish people can partake in this celebration. It's also clear that that doesn't mean ethnically Jewish. Servants and sojourners who have been circumcised to show their complete assimilation to Jewish life, they can partake, but nobody else. The reason this is important for us is because we recognize that salvation only comes from a covenant relationship with God, just like the covenant made with Abraham back in Genesis 17, where the rite of circumcision was given. Now, circumcision was given to symbolize life change and heart transformation. Really having faith in God and believing in Jesus as his Messiah necessitates a change in attitude and nature. Of course, this doesn't mean that we're going to be perfect. God didn't even expect Abraham to be perfect when he set up his covenant with him. Look at Genesis 15 to see that. But it does require being committed to a life of holiness and obedience, not abusing the grace and forgiveness that's been offered to you. In all, this chapter is foundational to Judaism. And that's because the event of God's salvation through the sacrificial lamb is remembered every year when they celebrate Passover. Now, when Jesus chose to die during that celebration, this chapter became foundational to Christianity too. Every year at Easter weekend, we remember our salvation through the blood of the sacrificial lamb, Jesus. We are purified, forgiven, and set apart only by Jesus' blood. Only faith in him and the resulting covenant relationship can save us. Thank you, Jesus, for everything you've done for us. Thanks for watching 1189. I hope you have a good day, and God bless.